Okay, get ready for some feedback. Looks like we're live, buddies. So Kirtana, we're live. We're live. Make your serious face. You can't say. You can't.
I'm very honored to be here talking to you, Pati. It's like
Before
really,
our August guests, our
you
August
know,
guests
uh,
and September speakers.
right. Terrible.
Who you like? Is it victim blaming to blame you for participating in this exercise? Yeah, I mean,
I,
letting me crack these jokes, so it's all your fault.
I guess I'm facilitating the behavior, no? I'm encouraging it. So,
The problem is there's no way for you to win. If you encourage it, also you lose. If you discourage it, also you lose.
great. So, I guess I'll shut up now.
Please don't shut up, dude. You're supposed to come here and sing now. Like that would be very embarrassing for our viewers. And
Right. Like what happened last time. We talk about yourself.
that's so funny.
You know, I'm
That's
so
so
sorry,
funny.
I don't know the name.
This is what happened last time, and we were losing our shit. We were like, okay, so first we had one speaker who couldn't join us, and
Right.
we figured this out at exactly 6:15, and we were hustling to find someone else to figure this out. And obviously, internet issues. I mean, I think this is a very 2005 exercise, if you ask me. Excuse, but of course, the internet connections have since improved thanks to Lord Reliance and their, Jio Zindagi plans. But in
So,
any case, what has happened since is that, yeah, and you were online from 6:30 to 7.
yeah.
And exactly at
Yeah.
7, you went offline, never to
Yeah.
reach this. And here you are, 3 days
Yes.
later.
I mean, the the current situation here is like, especially on Sundays, it's terrible. For some reason, they wanna, make life
Okay,
difficult for us.
I have one more. The current situation, I hope, is a thing of the past.
Okay, it looks like it is a thing of the past, but you never know.
You never know. We never know. We're going to enjoy maybe a performance. Maybe we're going to enjoy the darkness. Oh my God, the moth has gotten into my snack. Okay, anyway, sorry. That was not supposed to be live streamed, but unfortunately it is recorded for posterity. So anyway, a very, very good evening to all of you, all of our August viewers. And so welcome to Lawyers, Artists and Others Talk Law, Love and Equity. These are a series of performances and conversations which are inspired by a love for beauty and a love for wisdom. We think there's not enough of that in the media that we consume, and that's really crappy and very unfortunate. So here we are trying to talk about things of timeless feeling, whether it's a matter of the art that's created or the contact that it establishes with yourself, and in terms of the wisdom that's generated. We really truly hope that the conversations we have are the kind of conversations you could have had 100 years ago or 100 years hence, right? Because why not? Okay, there's a very, very excitable moth. It looks like it's going to die anytime now. In any case, so these conversations are also meant to be fundraisers because we've noticed that the cost of broadcasting online is nearly nothing. The only thing we've had to purchase here is like the Zoom subscription. And besides that, nothing else, right? So we think that in exchange, not in exchange really, but for the beauty that's generated and the experience that you're likely to have over a conversation like this, we want you to open your hearts a little bit, not just so that you can reflect on these ideas and think about it and mull over it some more and allow yourself to be moved, but also to change meaningfully someone else's life. Yeah. So we are fundraising for three important causes right now. The first one is social security for migrant workers. The second one is food security for the urban poor. And the third is PPE and protective gear for essential caregivers. That includes like kirana shop owners, barber shops, literally everyone, right? Because we need to take abundant caution. Whatever the situation is in your immediate locality, nothing like precludes the possibility of the curves bulging again, because no matter how dense our collected lives are going to be henceforth, right? And really, it's a matter of enabling the strangers who make our life possible. So that's the aspiration here. Even if you contribute whatever you would on a meal tonight as you're watching this exercise, it would be more than enough and sufficiently meaningful. Like $500 could buy rations for an entire week for a family of four. And yeah, so we would say contribute heartily. If you can't contribute, then your vibes and your energy are just as meaningful. And you can contribute in other ways as well. Treat another person kindly, enjoy the beauty, feel great, be moved. All of those are important consequences for the world. Today, first we have Kirtana, who is going to sing with us, sing for us, sing besides us, and all other prepositions in between. We had her perform 2 songs last time and discovered that she has a lovely bossa nova style. And I'm not saying this just to be cool, but it feels like you're on a beach in Brazil. I've never been to Brazil, but it feels like if there were a beach in Brazil, not on a Brazil, and it were really quiet. Basically, it's not like party time yet. This is the music you'd be listening to, like lunchtime when you're sitting in a cafe, um, looking outside when it's a little warm and it's still breezy, or if it's late at night, after the party's over, Kirtana would be there playing her music. So we're very lucky to have her here on Zoom, not in Brazil, but she could be anywhere. Kirtana is going to introduce herself later on, but for now, what we can tell for sure is that she sings, and she's going to sing for us. Yeah, at least for the next half an hour or so. Now I'm going to, Kirtana, on to you. I'm going to not appear on video, so feel free to occupy the space of the full screen.
So is it like what are you going to, talk to me in between the songs? Or just one long set of
No, the one long chat is going to last our entire lifetime.
right?
Because it was obviously interrupted between my school days and this pressing situation. So this is something that hopefully we will fix this lifetime. Otherwise, we'll fix it the next lifetime. So
That's just
for now,
tons of questions, but okay.
for now you can sing with us, and we won't interrupt you till about 7:50 or so when we expect our other guests to join as well.
Okay. All right. Then.
I will offer words of disturbance and engagement every now and then.
Okay.
If,
Perfect.
yeah, cool. Just to know you're not alone, by the way.
Yes,
Sorry.
exactly. Exactly. Because otherwise it's just something, playing to a blank screen. I'm not, but
It's life.
it's
was beautiful. I felt special. I mean, I don't know if it was sung to me, but I felt special anyway.
Since you're the only active audience, I'm glad that, you know,
No,
it makes
we have
you
many
better.
active audience. We are all
No,
active audience.
only one that I can see.
That
You're,
you're not. First of all, you're not seeing me, and second of all, I contain multitude, so I'm actually many people. So I'm an entire
okay,
audience.
okay. No, I'm not going to get into an argument about this. But
This
that
is
was,
the, yeah. Sorry,
sorry.
what was it called? What was it called? Tell us about it, and then we'll hear some.
So it's a song called You. It's one of the four songs that are going to be featured on my EP Jewel Nature whenever it is that I release, hopefully this month. It I wrote it in 2014, and it was, I don't know. I suppose I felt love for somebody, and I did write it for that person. But I suppose we can say that it's um, God. It's really embarrassing, but I suppose we can say it for everybody now.
We can, and we can also say it to ourselves, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's much harder to love yourself than to love another person.
sure.
But it's a
I,
nice coincidence that it was called You. I didn't know it was called You before you started singing. So, uh,
okay,
even though you sang it last time, and
right.
anyway, so we'll go on now. We'll I'll
Yeah,
talk
sure.
nonsense later.
Okay. This one's called Silicon. Cross the river by boat, with him is holding low, and in the springtime you find his open arms on the road. Down the light he walks alone, holding hope for his home. To a by her side, sing a moon song tonight. It's not about the glory, nor about the pride. He takes the story home. He takes the story home. And in a breath he's home. Silent seconds of life for the night. Grains of sand in desert June, the origins of Babylon, the messengers have arrived. Every age and every time, drawing circles around geometry in a glass. The spiral down a story holds us close to the fall. It's not about the history, nor about its
Thank you. It was lovely, Kirtana. What did you say the name was? I didn't catch it when you said it the first time around. Still didn't catch it.
Silica, S-I-L-I-C, Silica.
Silica. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, you have to explain something about this at a later point in time. Because
Sure.
soon we are going to have other organic and inorganic compounds making their way. This seems like a So, okay, back to more music. We have time for at least 2 more songs, if not more. So keep going.
Okay. Can you hear me? I mean, like, is everything okay?
We can hear you. We wish we heard you much more clearly. It's a bit like listening to you on a 1950s radio, with vacuum tubes and stuff. So it's very charming because it feels like it's distant, but charming is the nicest thing we can say about the audio quality. So your voice is coming through though, and it's our imagination of the fullness of your voice is complementing the musicality without any question.
Okay, good. Good. You wouldn't want to hear me. I mean, this is good then. I can't do anything to improve the situation. So I just go on to play another song.
Yeah.
I'll do a cover.
So beautiful. What's that called?
Stars in Metaphor. It is actually a song about spending time on a beach in Brazil.
You did that to make a point, did you?
No, I'm proving your accuracy on the fact that Bossa Nova is largely about Brazilian beaches.
I agree with myself.
Right.
I agree with
That's
myself like
located there.
that. So anyway, go on, Kirtana. So we have, looks like it's 7:38. We have time at least till 7:50, I think. So we have another 12 minutes to mess around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking. This one's called the switch.
That's so nice. What have you switched into? What are you about to switch into? Are you going to start playing some punk rock?
I wish I knew how.
You are a punk, so you just have to rock now.
Thanks, man.
So, yeah, so go on. We have time for one more song, which is awesome.
This one's also a cover.
Hmm. Good.
What happened? Tudo que você queria ser. Veio segredo. Você tem medo. Só pensa agora em voltar. Ela mostra a volta e uma dica para tudo que você queria ser. Tudo que você podia ser. Oh, nada, mas não importa, não faz mal, ainda nada, tudo que você deveria ser, sem medo. Não importa, não faz mal, nada, tudo que você deveria ser. Sorry about my voice there.
Oh, that was really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And so how are you feeling?
How am I feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm feeling great. Having performed in my bedroom, which is apparently the best place for me, actually.
It is easily the best place to have ever had you over. So
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very nice of you. So I know that you now perform and compose with and for Adi Shakti in Auroville, and
I'm not with them anymore. It's been a couple of months.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
And what are you doing then now?
Well, in the quarantine, I've just been practicing. There is no gigs.
Like that's a great use of quarantine time.
Yeah, it is absolutely a fantastic use of quarantine time. I actually wanted it to continue a little longer, but yeah, I mean, continue about Adi Shakti.
Yeah. So, and it was just a question. Do you like what is your what? How did it feel to work with them? Because what I really find beautiful about Adi Shakti is that it reorients our relationship with myth. So, for those who don't know, Adi Shakti was set up by this marvelous genius lady of a woman called Veena Pani Chakla, and she is. I mean, yeah, she was a dramaturg, playwright, performer, all of these things, a master educator more than anything else. And I only know of a legend, and I've only come across with you, with Bhavin, who was a senior of mine from law school, who also contemplated shifting his life to Pondicherry, right? So, I mean, it's not very easily that you think about giving someone your life and giving someone your time. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a then the question to ask is, what is it about this entire exercise that drew you to them?
Oh, well, they were the first example that for me, like living example that it was indeed possible for artists to, sustain themselves, form a community, and be dedicated to, working on their craft. And they had formed an ecosystem around that enabled and facilitated everything, for them to grow and give as much as they could to their art.
Mm,
And I
mm,
think that is what really drew me to them. And
mm,
of course, as I think I'm very, very lucky to have been included and, been a part of their workouts and their rehearsals, to have toured with them. I mean, there are a lot of people who come after every workshop and, ask if they can stay. But, to have been actually said, yeah, I mean, to have been told that indeed I can be a part of them, that was an incredible, incredible experience.
it sounds like a privilege. It sounds like a privilege, really, to have been able to tour with that. And for those who haven't yet encountered Adi Shakti, this is a nice time to encounter them. Because the core of their existence is like the fact that extraordinary craftsmen, and when I craftsmen, craftswomen, come together to really like pay full attention to their development, like self-development. And I think that really ties into what our next session is about. So we'll just talk about it in a few minutes. But what it means to have an education, right? When you're committed to your flourishing, and I mean, while there are structured programs, a lot of it is unstructured and self-driven. So if you're not like sufficiently motivated, I suppose there's not much reason to trouble yourself as much as you would through a setup which is as rigorous as Adi Shakti. And so far, I've only said something about that process, but the output is, for me personally, has been to reorient my relationship with Indian history, Indian mythology, so on and so forth, and allowed me to examine it afresh. This is, for one, we've discovered like stories and legends which we never have access to, you know. And the version that you have access to is based on religion. It's colored by. It's not to say that religion by itself is a problem, but like it's colored by. It's like versions of it which makes it seem like you can't have an opinion about the legend, you know. What I really like about Adi Shakti is you have fantastic, high quality performers who are very focused on educating themselves, presenting works of art which are reinterpretations and show you the evolution of mythology, really. Because
Yeah.
mythology is not a dead thing, right? It's alive, and it's made alive, and it's telling and retelling. So for that to happen in this time, at this present, I think it's so important. I mean, given like the political context that we live in, where it's very hard for us to relate to someone from another kind of context, and often even relate to ourselves, because I think most of us don't have a clear understanding of how we feel about a religious anchoring, so on and so forth. But what's it been like for you? Like, I understand for you clearly. You said this thing about practice, but you want to say something about your relationship with the product as well? What was it like to compose for modern interpretations of classics and myths?
I
Hi.
mean, I
We also have a panelist here. You can just say Aparna, Nigam, and Papan. I should call him Ananth. I think is Ananth okay?
Yeah, sure.
Because it happened in the previous episode where we had another senior of ours, Mr. Satyajit Charna, and we kept calling him sir. Not we. When I say we, it was basically me, and I was being chastised for it very much. It's very hard for me cognitively to think of you as Anant.
So if you slip into Papan, it's fine. It's
Okay.
absolutely
Right. No, because you're a dean now, Papan. So it's not.
Yeah, that's why I have this background.
It looks, it looks a bit like telemarketing, but
I get your point. You want me to change the background?
no,
Now
please.
I logged in with it, I guess.
No,
What's and all now? Everyone is seeing this.
no, this is great. I think it's amazing. This is the best way to do any Zoom call ever. In fact, all of us should be doing it. I don't want to. I like my background, like plants and other things. But at least with Nigam and with Aparna as well, it'd be nice to see some institutional affiliations.
I was going to say that Ananth and I are quickly becoming webinar buddies.
Yeah, I know.
We were on another webinar, if I'm right, a few weeks ago.
That is, we take great offense to your use of the term webinar. We haven't discovered what we are yet, but we are definitely not a webinar, right? Not a webinar. So call us not a webinar, hashtag not a webinar. Henceforth,
what are you calling it, Badri?
I have a verbose version, Nigam, and I need your assistance in making it anything nicer. We're calling it broadcast media, which is inspired for love, which is inspired by love for beauty and love for wisdom.
We'll have to turn that into an acronym, I think.
Yeah.
Broadcast media, BM. It sounds like BML Munjal. This is your brand.
That's a good one.
I don't mind going with that acronym.
So right now we're just calling it, again, not very verbosely, lawyers, artists, and others talk law, love, and equity. So what these things mean, it's a bit like jazz. It's a bit like the scatting that Kirtana was doing with us, of which, by the way, I could have heard an entire hour of. I don't know why you bothered like singing any song. We were just like done more. So even this, our expanded name doesn't really lend itself very well to an acronym. There's just no vowels in between. So I think we should just call it lol or something like that.
Add some vowels there.
Yeah, I see. That's why Aparna, please help in this.
So think of the acronym first, and then we'll just expand it.
What about lol?
Or the World Bank way.
But Badri, tell me this: what does legal education have to do with any of this stuff? I mean, I'm just still finding the connection.
Especially with love.
We will start with this question, but I feel really terrible because I left Kirtana hanging with a apparently thoughtful question and then just ignored her completely. So we'll just hear her answer on that and then move into us.
Yes.
Sidharth Chauhan is, as he was late to law school and he is late in life, is
He's late to the webinar.
hopefully he's going to join us in about 5 minutes. Sorry, we don't mean to make any jokes about Sidharth Chauhan. And
No, not at all.
Yeah, please, none whatsoever. Not today, at least. And Kirtana, so coming back to your question, so how do you feel about this? The way Adi Shakti has this beautiful capacity to reorient your relationship with myth, with stories.
Yes. But because I was doing music and because this is all there is for the contemporary year, for the contemporary mindset. Everything that I was composing felt very relevant, more so than I would have maybe felt playing these songs in a venue somewhere. I felt like the things that I had to write and produce had a place and had a voice in the setting. But it was, in terms of the stories and the things that I got to be a part of, it was good to know that the myths and legends that passed down can be looked at in so many different ways and that you can actually feel connected to it. Today, this person living in these times can actually feel empathy with some of the characters that you just think of them from afar. I don't know if that answers your question.
That totally does. I think that's a fair interpretation because I think there's another angle that you've hinted at, which actually is very, very cool to explore, which is that the essence of modernism is that you take the essence of things, delete the context, and then figure out what you want to do with it, right? Sure. Which says actually so much about our lives right now because we live in a time where facts and feelings and stimuli are all accessible independent of where they're from. I can sit here and listen to music which was made in the 1700s, right? Or if you're all of listening to all of classical music is like that, and I can do this alongside like Kendrick Lamar or Beyonce simultaneously. And at the same time, we live in a world with like Bollywood and Tollywood and sandalwood and lots of other kinds of woods and several forests as well. But the cool thing is we live in a time which is very well suited for the approach that you're describing, which is that you take something from everywhere, figure out how it integrates into your world, and bring it together in a form which is honest to where it came from and also where we are right now. which I think is an effect which is not very easy to manifest, and that it leads to feeling is actually pretty great.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be very carefully crafted because uh, in a way it's a collage, but in every piece is like handpicked. I don't know if that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's thoughtful, it's handpicked, it's deliberate. That's why the practice is so important. I think if you had a different process, it wouldn't lead to the same kind of outcome. I mean, I don't know enough about it, but like this is what it seems like from the outside, at least, right? So yeah, I mean, kudos to you all, and thanks for joining us. Thanks for working with us. Okay, it's about 7:58 now, so we will move into what is going to be the next part of our conversation. We'll do a quick introduction once again. So lawyers. Oh, Sidharth Chauhan is here. 1 minute. It's great to have him on. Where is he? You've just admitted him inside. Hi, Sidharth. Can you hear us? Your audio is not.
Okay. Is the sound carrying?
Yes, it is.
We can hear you.
Loud and clear. Loud and clear and grumpy and smiley simultaneously.
Yeah.
This is perfect. So you joined us at exactly the right time. So that actually 1 minute before time, we were making unnecessary jokes about, I was making unnecessary jokes about your lateness, which was certainly not merited under the circumstances. In any case, we have started this series. This broadcast is titled Lawyers, Artists and Others Talk Law, Love and Equity. The aspiration for us is to invent a form of broadcast media which is inspired by love for beauty and love for wisdom, right? So which allows allows yourself to be moved when you're watching a screen, which is something that doesn't really happen very often in our time, and allows us to have conversations which could have been relevant 100 years before, 100 years in the future as well. So there's a certain timelessness to the conversations here that we wish to sort of capture in a certain way, like be able to capture what the present looks like, and at the same time be able to speak of our aspirations for the future, right? So it's wonderful to have 4 of you as panelists. We have Aparna Chandra, who's from NLU Delhi. We have Nigam, who is the Dean of the BML Munjal School of Law. We have Ananth Padmanabhan, who is the Dean of the Daksha Fellowship. And we have Sidharth Chauhan, who is presently at NALSAR in Hyderabad. So it's wonderful to have the 4 of you here because I have personally looked up to all of you many, many times in my life, and I continue to, and I believe that I always will, because not just for, in a certain way, the lightness of your existence. I like the fact that you always invite new ways of being, and you don't hold your opinion so strongly that you don't allow for your mind to change, And that's fundamental to any task of evolution. And I've really admired that about all of you, besides saying nothing about the fact that you're extremely accomplished and very articulate and very educated and thoughtful about how you do what you do. And of course, you've also been tolerant of me in the past, and I hope you will be over the next hour and a half. So this series is also meant to be a representation of what we think can be public media, because we think we have a state channel, Doordarshan, that's not a public channel necessarily. The problem with our media is we don't necessarily see the interests which are guiding it, and that's very unfortunate. So we are trying to have a version of it where in exchange almost of the beauty and wisdom that's captured through this conversation, we hope you as a viewer would contribute towards 3 significant causes right now. The first is like social security for migrant workers. The second is food security for the urban poor. And the third is protective gear for essential caregivers, right? For caregivers. And the aspiration with all of this is many strangers make our lives possible, whether it's laborers, whether it's like barbers and shop owners and delivery boys and ladies and cab drivers and so on and so forth. So the idea is to see if we can be a little more empathetic towards them. We're not interested in large acts of kindness. We're interested much more in regular, habitual, small acts of kindness here, right? So, but in any case, your vibes are more important than your money. So even if you're not contributing here, see if you can be a little more clued into yourself, a little more clued into another person, and a little more clued into nature, really. So that's the aspiration to answer the question that came just before you, Sidharth. And so now I'm going to ask all of you, including Kirtana. We'll start with Kirtana, and Kirtana, after that, you can feel free to stay on, log off as you wish. Yeah.
Okay,
So
okay.
the question to all of you is how would you describe yourself without talking about what you do or where you're from? We ask all our panelists this question because we've essentially noticed that people have a very rich life, and we just know you as a teacher or an educator or a musician, and that sort of comes in the way of understanding the fullness of your existence. So if you can tell us a little bit about, what you dream about, what are your favorite ticks and trips and tricks, and I mean, you can capture yourself however you want, and so we'll start with you, Kirtana, and and then go on.
Okay. Since you all already know, I am a musician, but I'm not allowed to talk about that. But I love reading books. I spend a lot of time actually finding the next book that will grab my attention. And right now, something called The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Apart from that, I want to travel to Brazil if ever we get the chance and for us to travel again. And what else? I don't know. I don't know what I dream about, but hopefully one day, someday, my music will be heard by a lot more people. I think that is a good aspiration to get to.
Yeah.
I nominate Badri. No, we can't do that. I nominate Aparna.
I think I'm tired of my own voice. I haven't even started, so it's only going to get worse from here. So please don't ask me. Do you want to nominate Aparna instead?
I should say, as you asked that question, I realized how much of my identity and my sense of self is tied up to my work, which is very dangerous. What do I dream of? Frankly, I have a 2-year-old, so I dream of a full night's sleep. That's really the top of my agenda and takes up all of my mind space outside of work at this present moment. I should say that being around and parenting a small kid has made me very interested in how we develop our cognition and how we interact with the world and how do we communicate with the world, because for the 2-year-old, much of my son's life has been nonverbal. And how do you pick up cues? How do we pick up cues about people around us? How do people communicate to us in multiple ways? And we focus so much on the verbal or the written, but there's just so many ways to communicate. It's fascinating seeing someone become their own person, and the development that they're going through. So I'm just fascinated by it. I'm probably trying to intellectualize parenting a bit too much, but yeah, that's unfortunately or fortunately what literally keeps me up at night currently, and what I think of, do outside of work at the present moment.
Thanks, Aparna. The great thing about that is I've completely forgotten your identity as a mother, and I suppose that's like that's messed up, because this is what patriarchy looks like in an everyday context, right? To not notice not notice the context in which that women operate in a way that's unique. So I suppose this session is especially special because you will be able to perceive cognition from first principles, because in a certain way you're probably teaching yourself from scratch right now.
Right.
And so that's it's nice that you're here with this aspiration and this particular angle. I hope you get a very full night's
soon.
But it'll happen.
It'll happen.
Turn 3, and then hopefully it's inevitable by then. So Nigam, how are you doing? How would you introduce yourself?
Good. Well, I got to say, Badri, all this, just you talking for the last 10-15 minutes has taken me on a nostalgic trip to how our life was together as Imperial University. So I was just thinking about how what a great time we had there with students and everybody. But anyway, you warned me not to talk about my professional life, so I won't do that. But I just wanted to say that your voice brought back very good memories. So interesting question actually, and a great question in some ways, because it's I want to echo Aparna. I think difficult sometimes for us to go out of the bubble that we are in, which we are in most of the time, and think about something else. So one way I want to answer is to say that I like to think of myself, and I don't want to sound pompous, but I want to think of myself as a philosopher, right? And by that I mean not the kind of academic philosopher that we see around us. I think somewhat academia has somewhat in some ways tainted philosophy, has made it very boring and almost out of the grasp of everybody. Whereas I think everyone needs to get excited about philosophy, just like Aparna did just now. I mean, she was talking about cognition and a child, and that's a very beautiful way of trying to philosophize as a person, trying to figure out from basic principles, as you mentioned. And I want to, and for me, I look at my life as kind of doing that, or trying to do that in whatever I do. So it's funny that I'm a tax professor. So for me to talk about philosophy sounds almost, almost like an aberration. But even when I do that, even when I do tax, even when I'm teaching GSTs, and I think about philosophy behind indirect taxation, for example, or about anything else. I mean, I don't know if you know this, Badri, but or you might, considering you're very adept at internet.
No, I'm pretending to know. I'm very adept at pretending.
So I used to. I don't do that now, but I used to actually.
You're talking about your blog, aren't you? Your film blog.
That's right. That's it. I told you. I knew you will know this. So yes, I used to do some amateur film reviews, and in fact, some of my film reviews are still on Rotten Tomatoes and all those kind of websites. And what's interesting about that is that the French movie reviewers who made reviewing interesting and fashionable were actually reviewing kind of these American westerns, which would be considered as pulp cinema in America and everywhere else. And so what they were trying to say, in effect, is what I was indicating at. They're trying to figure out a lot of interesting philosophical angles, even in everyday life, right? And I think that's for me, that to me is my greatest obsession outside. So my obsession with philosophy of that sort is in movies and in sport, cricket, and I try to do that.
That's amazing, Nigam. That is such a wonderful answer. Even if you don't talk about our APU time together, I have to, because for me, my time in your law and justice classes and really any excuse I had to hang out with you were easily the best times that I had. The only thing that came close was interacting with students, because we had such a diverse set of people, right? And that continues to hold true. I hope it becomes more true of more and more classrooms around the country, because I think it just fundamentally improves the quality of the conversation. Because it was your course, actually, I learned what philosophy meant, I remember we were discussing Kant in class, and you're super empathetic as a teacher, and anyone who's signing in probably knows this, right? And you came by with a list of questions so that people could appreciate deontology. I was about to say people could appreciate deontology deontologically. Just to enjoy a little nerdy moment. But in any case, you brought that note out, and the first hour of the class was flagging a little bit. And I remember you changed your strategy in the second hour, because all of a sudden you made it about lived experience, right? And philosophy as an idea comes from the love for living. So in many ways, you're responsible for me leaving APU and any academic aspirations of my own, because suddenly I realized that philosophy was a matter of living. It was a matter of how you lived your life and the choices that you made. And with you and with others at APU, I discovered for me, actually, like Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius, which was fashionable on Twitter back in 2014, 2015. I think it was slightly before the Twitter craze of Stoicism back then. And that happened around the same time. And I started realizing that it's really a matter of how you lived your life. So to be a philosopher is to live philosophically, not to have to write books that 3 people would read, excluding yourself. I was about to say excluding yourself and your mother, but that's just, it was mean for no good reason. In any case, so thanks for that beautiful answer. The film blog is going to be rediscovered and shared on our comment section very shortly. But you have nothing to be ashamed of. It's a great film blog. I love reading it. And it seems like you were born at age 50 or something, when you read those pieces. And now you've had so much time to...
Like it as well. That's correct.
it makes sense. So, I see now, again, I'm blubbering between Ananth and Papan. So, Ananth, for now, how would you introduce yourself without talking about what you do?
Right. I mean, the fact that I have a virtual background with the fellowship is not a very good start. considering the question is about separating our work lives and, everything that defines our personhood. Anyway, I'll begin with just cracking a stupid professorial joke since we are on the topic of philosophy. I was reading somewhere that 1,000 years ago, philosophers were looking for God, and now they are looking for tenure. So we are in a
Exactly.
very difficult position. But I mean, but it's interesting, Nigam, that you mentioned movies because in some sense, that is my sort of fix as well at some level. I mean, I'm someone who pretty much tries to watch a movie or some piece of new creative content every day. I mean, the fact that I'm single helps, and but yeah, basically in my dream world, I really like watching movies, but more than watching them, I like movies that probe the human mind, especially the crime genre, the thriller genre, but even drama. And the fact that I grew up in Kerala, which has a very good Malayalam regional industry, uh, has helped in that process. We've had some great movie makers like Padmarajan or a Bharadan or a Lohita Das. And I grew up watching all of that. And of course, some great actors, Mohanlal, Mammootty, right? So for me, growing up was really these movies and how the idea of heroism kind of evolved right while growing up, because the Malayalam industry also went through massive transitions. And I think as a child, growing up in a boys school, these ideas of heroism really became in some sense what we kind of looked up to, right? And then you see a very different industry evolve in the 2000s and so on. So given a chance at some point in life, I'd like to produce a movie, because I know I can't direct when I don't have the chops to do that. Not that I have the finances to produce one either. But I mean, I what I like about the movie industry is that one, of course, there's a lot of thought that goes into understanding human behavior, and I find that genuinely fascinating. The second is there's a lot of opportunity to bring out new talent, right? New people, like new kinds of actors. For instance, someone like a Fahad Fasil has inspired me a lot in life. Just the man's career trajectory, right? He started off when he was 20 years old, launched as director Fasil's Son. The movie was a complete washout, and then the guy just vanished on all of us. 8 9 years later, he comes back, and look at the kind of work he's done in the last decade, right? It's incredible. Kumbalangi Nights and Super Deluxe. So I'm a big regional movie buff, and it sort of is in some sense. I don't know whether it's my life or whether it's the parallel life I lead, but I just love regional content, Kannada movies, Marathi movies. I just love watching a lot of regional content. So for me, that's really what I love.
This there was a beautiful answer, Papan. And what was really nice about it is that the great thing about Malayalam movies is that they have such a good mix of modernism and realism, and in the way the processes that they adopt and what comes out. And speaking of Fahad Fasil, I remember this really silly joke. We discovered a movie on Netflix and told each other we should watch Enjan Prakashan. And I went to Vishak Abraham, who's Siddharth's classmate here, and said, "Have you watched Enjan Prakashan?" He's like, "No, that's Nyan. That is me. My name is Prakashan." But anyway, we have since learned that pronunciations on Netflix subtitles can be very misleading, and the directors don't help necessarily. I hope they improve that. That's the only thing which is missing with Malayalam films, but otherwise, it's really a blessing to humanity. So thanks for telling us that. You want to recommend one favorite film that we leave here for others to check out?
Yeah, sure. I would definitely recommend Kumbalangi Nights, which is on Amazon Prime. It's definitely worth a see.
Okay, so we will leave that here in the comments as it goes along. Okay, thank you. Sidharth, it's funny calling you Sidharth. We're going to try our best to call you Sidharth. And yeah, so how would you introduce yourself without talking about what you do, where you're from?
I mean, that's difficult because for the out of the last 17 years, I've spent 15 years living in campuses. So it's difficult to separate your private life from an institutional context. There was only a 2-year period in the interim where I was not in a campus. So, I mean, one way of thinking about it is that not only are you a product of your choices, but you're also a product of your circumstances. And one possibility which, I often think about, which could have taken me in a different direction, was possibly an early interest in theater, which I kind of initially developed as an escape from physics and chemistry classes in high school, and bungled them up really horribly. Spent some time roaming around the states of Punjab and Haryana around that time, where most of my peers were actually preparing for engineering entrances. This was around 20 years ago. And much of that time was actually spent in a stage production and a street play with two different groups. So for an average upper caste North Indian male who was expected to prepare and get into engineering school around that time, what I was doing was possibly my own private act of rebellion. But apart from failing in high school, I didn't really pursue that risky option further. And then very soon, I accidentally got into law school a couple of years after that. And then life has taken on a different direction. So for me, to be honest, it could have gone any way. It could have gone in any direction around that time. And to some extent, I feel that I haven't done enough to keep up with my interest, both in folk theater or in mainstream theater, because there is just so much to explore. I mean, there was just an early introduction to writers like Badal Sarkar or Girish Karnad or Mohan Rakesh, because at that time I was mostly reading translations. But that's an interest which I think I regret not being able to follow up over the last few years. So now with the middle age coming up soon, maybe there'll be a chance to go back to those original interests. But in terms of other activities, to be honest, completely, I mean, I've been now teaching for 8 years, so I just see myself as so enmeshed in the institution that I'm part of, that it's difficult to separate that professional and private space, as Aparna was also talking about. And very often, it's not simply playing out in terms of how you allocate time in a day or what your priorities are, but it just becomes a natural state of being. So maybe those people who work in non-residential contexts will not have the same sort of engagement, but it's very difficult for me to make that separation at this point in time. Luckily, this term, actually, I finally got research leave after a long time. So I've been sitting in my hometown for the last 4 months, even prior to the lockdown. So it is a period to try and connect the various dots in your life and think about what went wrong, what was incoherent, what has worked, what has not worked. So in that sense, what's happening at the larger abstract level in terms of the sense of crisis that we are part of, I am anyway in the opposite boat. I'm sitting calmly, confidently, sitting in the comforts of my parents' upper caste, middle rich home. So for me, to be honest, it's actually a question that relates to my present, but I don't think I have a coherent answer beyond what I've said so far.
That was coherent enough for the whole session, as always. But I think, Chauhan, the thing I want to take from what you're saying, which is actually applicable to all of you here, and Kirtana as a music teacher as well, is that all of you are teachers as a way of life. It so happens that it also happens to earn you like bread and butter. Even before Daksha started, Papan has been working in public education in a certain way, I think, for a long time, because his work was not just in policy, right? Like, so much of your work was about informing people like me, people like who have no context at all in what you're doing, about the relationship between technology and society, and some of the choices that we make without thinking too much about it, or the work that Aparna has been doing. So that, like, the fact that your personal life and your professional life happens to intersect is really a feature of working in academia, I think, in any capacity. So it's fine. We don't have to be like super strict about answering that. But it's lovely to hear about hear once again about your interest in theater, Sidharth. So this is it's not something you and I have ever spoken about before, because we seem to always have too much to talk about. But it's nice of you to share that with us. Okay, so let's move into the meat of our conversation now that the skin is off. Sorry. So the first question that I have to all of you, and the reason that I have this question is, in some ways, you all come from different institutional contexts, right? So Aparna and Sidharth, you're part of the National Law University system. Nigam and Ananth are part of the private university system, right? Nigam has an understanding of this where he is obviously inspired by his extreme sort of humanism, I think, more than anything else, whether it's as a dean or as a teacher in a class, right? So he seems to be approaching like deanship from a distance, at least with the same kind of empathy that you'd have as a teacher, which is very interesting to see. Papan, with you, I feel like you're moving us ahead into the future, like, because there's a huge gap still between what legal education is and what the law of the world seems to need. And it seems wasteful that all resources in education happens after a law school program, right? So in a certain way, your bridge is relevant today and will always be relevant because there will always be a gap in that space. So the fact that your education can be as forward thinking as your program is really places you in a very nice context for this conversation. Now, with Aparna and Sidharth, both of you are probably the most institutionally minded people that I know, in the sense that you have an imagination for systems of fairness before you have an imagination of, say, individuals who might be involved, right? And in fact, like Sidharth left the National Law School under circumstances which were less than ideal. And I would say it was because of his commitment to the institution, right? Which persuaded him to speak up about what he thought of as an injustice. And it's no surprise that everyone wanted to have Sidharth on after, and it's very lucky. I mean, NALSAR is very lucky to have him. And Aparna, I mean, like, you joined NLU-Delhi at a time when it was just starting up, right? And so in many ways, the work that you do, the work that you've done, is a matter of building a university from scratch. So the both of you have seen public universities from its building blocks. So that's been involved also with student politics and all of these other things. So I'm really looking forward to the richness of the conversation. So after that extremely long prelude and context, the question that I have for you is, in 2 or 3 sentences, could you describe what your ultimate aspiration for the education that you deliver is? Yeah. So you could speak in your role as a teacher, Aparna, you could speak in your role as the director of research centers, lead on research papers. So speak from your context particularly. That's all that I'm suggesting. And could you just share with us how you, what you think the aspirations for legal education are?
Right. For me, my aspiration for my class, let me start there, would be to get my students to think about the law. I teach constitutional law, to think about the law as in the ways in which it operates on the ground, right? Not as it operates in, or not as it gets discussed in the courts of law, or in textbooks, or in debates in the classroom, but the real world impact that the law has on the ground. And that requires, and that's the aim with having a research center in a university that's focused on, again, not just archival research. Archival research is very important, but not just researching the judicial archive or the legal archive, but also action-oriented research, field work, working with groups and communities, etc., etc. The idea is to bridge that gap between the classroom and the way that the law operates on the ground. So that's really the aspiration for law teaching within the classroom, and the aspiration for the research center. And I don't see them as necessarily two different things. I have a whole range of aspirations for the university, and for the structures of the university and the classroom, and who gets to be in the classroom, and classroom dynamics and things like that. But I'm sure we'll come to those questions later. But yeah, let me stop here and come to those points later.
Right. So if I were to summarize that, would I be right in saying that you are interested in creating a constitutional culture, which is in affiliation with the Constitution in ways not just as an interpreter of it, but in a certain way being a good citizen of the state, or a good lawyer, understanding, associating with the spirit of it?
Right. Well, the citizen as a constitutional actor, right? So, I mean, the assumption, come to it with the understanding, this is something I say in class when I begin my constitutional law course, that this is not about you as a student learning the law of the Constitution, or you as a potential lawyer, but you as a citizen, as a constitutional actor. And you build in constitutional culture. And again, I mean, we have a constitutional culture right now. I don't think we have a constitutional culture that we should be proud of. So it's about reorienting that constitutional culture to think about power and think about the constitution and about law as power, and and relationships in society as flows of power, and how does the law intersect, how should it intersect, how does it intersect with the social power, and build a culture where that power can be held accountable.
Beautiful. I think that's a great answer, because you're also saying another thing, which I'm stating, it was not necessarily stated explicitly, but you're also stating that you can't practice constitutional law without behaving constitutionally. If that means like being a good citizen, it means like believing in the primacy of certain principles, then so be it. I just want to leave that there for now, and we'll get into a deeper conversation, I'm sure, as we go along. Okay, so Papan, how do you feel about the aspirations of what you're doing, and how would you describe it in a few sentences?
Right. So the very fact that in many ways this is a bridge, right, between the world of learning and the world of work, sets a few aspirations that we would really like to see this program achieve. One is, of course, a constant sense of learning new things, which I think is really important for anybody, whether you're a lawyer, you're a chartered accountant, or a doctor. In the current times that we are living in, the uncertainty is just too heavy, and we would really like the learner to have that ability to just pick up the book and learn things, much quicker, in a much more efficient way. So basically, teach them how to learn on their own, right? So that's something which I think we really would like to build. The second aspect that I have at least personally felt is a gap is teaching lawyers to collaborate. Often lawyers operate very well as individual bright minds. One of the things that I did see as a gap in our disciplinary attitude itself is a lot of emphasis on the individual, and perhaps that does come from the fact that the profession is revolving around views and opinions and arguments and debates. But I see that the nature of lawyering itself is going through a fair bit of change, and lawyers in the world of work have to be more integrated with separate teams, coders and multiple other individuals and entities, right? And therefore, figuring out how to bring in a certain spirit of collaboration. And for instance, that's where something like folk theater and many other activities need to, I think, be integrated into our learning model and vision. That's the second thing. And then finally, I mean, this is of course a real long shot, and I don't know whether we'll ever get there. I believe that education has to go very personalized, and there has to be better ways of imparting personalized learning, both in primary, secondary, tertiary, and school level, at the school level, and in higher education. And in sync with that, I do feel that even with legal education, there must be some way that we can figure this out, do this better, because I've seen really, really bright people do badly in a uniform system of evaluation and grading and so on. And how do we solve it? I don't know the answer, but I think that's the third thing that I would like to spend some time solving in my journey.
That's, Papan, that is a great answer for a bunch of reasons. Like I can see, I mean, you did flag off 3 points. The first was the bridge between law, life, work, studying, all three of these things, because you're also talking about an imagination of practicing law and being connected to it, right? So it's more contemporary. So it's not dead. It's very much an alive and existing thing. The second thing about collaboration, it's so funny. It's so subtle that I didn't think about it at all. Like it's almost as though like legal education assumes that everyone who goes through law school needs the same kind of skills. Everyone needs to learn how to do research really well. Everyone needs to learn how to present their briefs really well, and so on and so forth. Without realizing that there are many aspects to the practice of law, most of which is non-legal. And we actually have no way of teaching that. So, and I think like collaboration is easily the most important among those. We need fewer shining stars and more beautiful constellations, if I were to like capture it in any other way. And the third one is your commitment to interdisciplinarity, right? I feel you're totally right. I don't think we've just thought about what legal education as an education from first principles would look like. So in a certain sense, that you're not tied to a university is actually a great fact, because it gives you freedom to explore a lot of other things and also stay connected to your ultimate users who are going to eventually pass their vote of confidence with their money, right? And which is a nice incentive structure, so to say. I mean, of course, you're supported by a massive like donation, and you have all of these things set up, but the fact that you're more connected to the immediate stimuli of people for whom this better be useful is great. And I think that forces interdisciplinarity, that forces coming in contact with what people need in a way that traditional institution structures don't support, probably with good reason. In most cases, with good reason, I feel, right? I think Sidharth is going to have a lot more to say about this precise idea. So Sidharth, how do you describe your aspirations for legal education?
Well, I mean, I'll begin by first trying to talk about what I've tried to do as a teacher. And then I think the institutional vision will probably feed into the subsequent questions as well. So in many ways, I've only been teaching for 8 years. So much of what you do in the early stages is a reaction to what you felt was lacking when you were a student. So for instance, I think Papan and I were very close in terms of our time overlap. And I personally, of course, came from a position where I felt that much of the discussion inside the classroom was based on the sort of opposition between state and markets. So we were either concentrating on public law courses by talking about normative ideals, or we were talking about commercial law courses as instruments to knowledge which will help people get jobs. But somehow the third pillar, civil society, was not getting the kind of rigorous attention that it deserved. Of course, there were exceptional teachers who we were lucky to learn from, but we didn't really see the sustained interaction between how the modern public sphere has been constructed in a coherent way across our courses. So at least in my own teaching, and I've gotten to do a range of subjects, sometimes filling in for others, sometimes now, of course, in the last 4 years, I've gotten to move into constitutional law. So I've always tried to begin with a primer on political theory for my students, that irrespective of the stage of study that you're in, how do you think about these core concepts which are important to visualize what might be described as public and what might be described as private. Of course, there are certain ideologies which disagree with that formulation. So for me, a lot of the ideals of civil society, I think, have not been given the kind of articulation that they deserve, especially in the small elitist institutions that all of us have studied at. And it's far more important to introduce students to that vocabulary at an early stage, so that they start acknowledging that the spirit of voluntarism, the spirit of solidarity actually comes before you start thinking about economic incentives or even the exercise of governmental power. So that's really been a challenge, not just through courses in political theory or constitutional law, but even in the after-class experience, how you interact with students when they come to you with queries about what they want to do in their internships, what kind of jobs they want to apply to, what kind of papers they want to write. So this is at least one sort of normative framework which I've tried to develop for myself, that the students should understand the nuances of bureaucratic governmental power. They should have a functional understanding of where they stand to gain or lose from in their participation in various market structures. But there should also be adequate attention to this third pillar, which I personally felt I didn't get enough exposure to when I was a student. In terms of the institutional vision, of course, we've tried to do a little bit through public education. In fact, my current immediate boss has done a lot more for public education through his videos in Hindi, which have tried to take constitutional law to a larger audience. But I think that's an effort which requires an umbrella. It can't be done by a few institutions located in different parts of the country. I think we need to create a cross-national network to really take both the doctrinal and the empirical understanding of constitutional law, as Aparna puts it, to a much larger audience, right? Through vernacular language, through popular media. And it's great to see that there are some initiatives of that kind which have come up in the recent past. So I think going forward, these small elite institutions need to really expand their investment in public education programs. And on the side of professional or distance education, I think we'll come to that point later in our conversation. Clearly, there is a deep debate about what the implication of this shift to online education means. At one level, there are questions of access and disparity, because still a significant segment of our student population does not have reliable access to internet or conducive environments at home. And on the other hand, you have this technocratic vision that online education can actually expand the reach of certain courses which so far have been delivered to a small fee-paying audience. So I think we'll probably get into some of those ideas later in the conversation, I guess.
Yeah, we'll most certainly get into these ideas a little more. The point of civic education, I can't agree more with. I just think you can't have enough of it. How much ever you have of it, it's just not enough, right? This is also an effort in that direction. Literally every aspect of how we live our life is potentially subject for civic education. So this culture is a culture to wear, and it's a culture to distribute both simultaneously. And I think I'm really looking forward to, we are in it right now. So I'm really enjoying this because there's the continuity of imagination between all of you on this point. And I think the constitutional culture is a point that Aparna was speaking as well. So that was nice. On this first point that you made about the intersection between the public and private world, I can't think of anyone better than Nigam to sort of speak about it. Tax, I think, is the most boring description of the relationship that the citizen has with the state, because it reduces that relationship to a financial transaction. And we know from behavioral economics that money is the weakest incentive to cultivate a relationship. And in fact, it's actually more damaging than it is to have other forms of association, right? So that you worked in tax, but you also live very philosophically, Nigam, is not surprising to me at all. I know it goes back to what you said earlier. And I suppose that's what Sidharth is also implying, which is that your life, either in public law or private law, doesn't really matter if you don't have a sense of fraternity. So I'm sure that's going to inform something about what you're about to say. But what more do you have to say about this? Not what more do you have to say, but what do you have to say about this?
And that's a good question when you say what more do I have to say, because I'm really fascinated by each of the replies that was given here. I really want to pick up strands from each of the speakers, because it's really kind of opened up a vista of what I was trying to say during this segment of our conversation. So, Badri, you started by asking us what's that one vision of yours, or one aspiration of yours when it comes to legal education, and mine, in common, by the way, with that's why I'm saying I was fascinated by what they said. In common with the replies of all the other panelists, is my vision is how do we understand and better a student-focused legal education, right? That's what I've always been trying to understand what this is all about. Sidharth, so I'll just pick up strands from each one of them. Sidharth didn't tell us that what's interesting about the third pillar. He didn't tell us what's fascinating about civic education and civil society. What he said was, how do we make students understand that the value of the third pillar? How do we make students value what is civic society? And that's what I meant. I meant a perspective on legal education that actually is student focused, that within that larger area of student focus brings other strands. In his case, for example, more research and understanding of the third pillar and other normative approaches. Similarly with Aparna, she said she's not saying that in some ways an empirical study into constitution is interesting by itself. I think what she was trying to say, or at least what I found fascinating about what she was saying, is that we make students understand the constitution better when we understand how the constitution works in practice, right? Whereas what Ananth was saying is more directly on point. He's saying, look, students, if they don't understand the intersection of technology and the law, they don't understand either law or technology in some contexts, right? And so for me, that is fascinating for me, because that focus on student-focused education, which I'm glad to see the other panelists doing as well, is crucial. And I'm saying this, Badri, because you and I have had this chat many times, but it's really glaring to me how many institutions, including NAC, for example, the accreditation institution, it's not really, when I see the NAC documents, I'm sure others have seen it as well, the student-focused part of it is somewhat missing. They got this silos, they got this teaching, they got this research, but how are we ensuring that the student learning experience is getting better? That part of it, I think, is missing. It's also missing in the way the academia is motivated. The whole alignments are missing. So we don't reward teachers for energizing students. We reward teachers for publishing articles, and it's fine. So I agree that if a person is not a good researcher, he or she cannot become a good teacher. I understand that. But where is the focus on rewarding teachers for that extra mile they go in making student experience better? So those are the kind of issues that I'm interested in.
Nigam, there is such classic Nigam intervention, because you just took what everyone said and found the essential element that sort of captures our aspirations in a way that we might not have necessarily noticed. When you said it, it was like, what? How did we not notice it? But at the same time, really, I didn't think to frame it in that direction. And honestly, I probably didn't, because I do feel our institutional imaginations are very focused on production of education, right? Production of graduates, the production of papers, the production of the other buildings often, which is one of the things that institutions produce. And that is just not sufficiently indicative of the classroom experience. And it's also a significant point because it's a matter of load, right? For people like Sidharth or Aparna, working in their university with the number of students they deal with the level of engagement they deal with it, they're massively underpaid under any imagination of this. And second, I don't even know when you can think about starting your own paper or working on your own research. So now when Nigam is saying that being a teacher is not just about your research, but your student focus and energizing students, the two of you, I mean, all of you here have done such great things for the students who work with you, which is why I think you're adored as much as you are. And obviously you speak as well as you do because you've been honing this for a very long time. So, okay, this is a nice thing to know, but we'll use this as a base for the next question, right? So I would like to understand with each of you, your description of who your student is, right? So who is your student, and where do they begin and where do they go? Hey, thanks. Where do they begin and where do they go? Like, I know you've sort of answered that in your answers, but it would be nice to see it with some more texture, because your students actually go to many different places. So with you, Aparna and Sidharth, we don't really need to hear that they go and practice constitutional law, for instance, or go and practice political philosophy. But let's say we take a discrete student population with different kinds of students, and you can talk about 2-3 student journeys, right? The way we have, typically within legal education, we have a law firm life, we have an academic life, we have a non-lawyering sort of life. We have some which is a mix of all of these things, some which is none of these things. So imagine that you have a similar demographic context. I think with Papan, of course, it's much more focused, but also expansive in a new way, which has not been explored yet. So I look forward to your description of your students and their learning journeys through your respective programs. So Papan, let's start with you, because I feel like you're the most distinctive, and then we can move with the others.
Yeah. So in my case, what we are really looking at is 2 different kinds of, individuals, right? I mean, if you were to sort of say, create these student personas, one is, someone who is from a tier 1 or even a tier 2, tier 3 law school, who has done all the theoretical learning, final year of college, and really wants to now give a certain kind of focus, certain degree of exposure to their lives. I mean, when doing the physical outreach for our program in the limited time that we got, and subsequently the digital outreach as well, the one thing that strikes you is that the exposure that all of us here were fortunate to get. I mean, we should be really grateful that we got that. To see a Soli Sorabji and really even, sort of respond to him, right? I mean, all of this can really shape you, mold you, and I'm sure, I don't know whether any of us got to see Mr. Jetmalani, but I think Nigam did. So having this sort of exposure, right, can completely change the way you think about the law. So one kind of student persona is really an underexposed but very confident, smart student who we can really mold, give them that exposure, right? So that's one aspect to it. The other aspect is that and that's where, Daksha becomes tricky, right? Because you are appealing to very, at some level, on the face of it at least, distinct, kinds of student persona, and trying to find a common connection there, or common aspirational goal that you're presenting to them, right? So the other kind of student persona is someone who has worked, let's say, for 1 or 2 years. And we all know this, right? I mean, when we say the law firm life or the litigator life, that a lot of it for the first 2-3 years is really shaping your personality within that environment. And it's only when you really get down that journey, unless clarity strikes you very early, which happens maybe with Rhodes scholars and with batch toppers and people who go on to become partners in law firms, very young and so on. But in most other cases, at least I look back at my own journey, right? I mean, where I began my life working with Arvind Datar, and then everything, setting up my own office, then winding everything up, going abroad to do my master's and PhD, and then coming back working in a think tank, and now this role, right? So all of this is teaching you something. It's also making you unlearn certain things and so on. And I feel that particularly in the first 2 to 3 years of your career, there's a lot of that unlearning and self-realization that's actually going on. So for instance, to give you an example, you go to and we have been getting these kinds of applications, so I can talk about this. Students who are working as M&A lawyers, for about 2 years, and now want to completely transition to doing technology law because they find technology fascinating. They just haven't done a course on data protection or cyber security, and or even for that matter, public policy, right? Because they do feel the opportunity to move to a technology company advising as part of their public policy team, right? So there are these two different kinds of student personas who we are then trying to get together. And of course, any fellowship will require very active peer learning, right? And that's the whole idea of fellowship, giving them that aspirational goal that from this point you are going to a different point in your life, in your career, where you are bringing in that higher degree of exposure plus some degree of specialization, which is basically the three pathways that we are offering at the fellowship, right? So while yes, the fact that like you mentioned, the fact that we have a technology law and policy bucket, a law and regulation bucket, and a disputes resolution bucket, ensure some degree of self-selection from the part of the student, ensure some degree of focus even for us to define the student. It is actually not easy. Many students are very confused, and I see counseling extending to maybe 1 month or 2 months into the time we begin the program in September, to help them actually find which is this pathway that they would actually really relate themselves to or align their goals with. So it's actually not as easy as we think, even though it's at some level a specialized program.
Papan, that's a super nuanced point because see, okay, let's just like unpack that a little bit. The first thing you said was this desire for self-realization is what is motivating people to join you. So in a certain way, you're dealing with a higher degree of confusion than the blank slate of undergraduates and say graduate students in traditional universities, right? So that it's confusing is not surprising at all. It's natural. It's a function of the fact that your audience is looking to shift their life from a certain way of life to another way of life in a direction you seem to suggest is possible, but nobody knows if it's actually going or not. So there's the uncertainty of the outcome as well, and the uncertainty that you have students coming in with right at the start. And the next question we're going to explore this the user customer on one side and the student on the other side as an imagination, because it looks like that's a big point that all of us can, I mean, not me, but like all of you would have something interesting to say about. So we'll flag this off as the next thing that we come to, because the line between pandering and providing service and on the other side, service and servility is, I mean, it's non-existent. So what is one can look like the other at any point in time. And obviously we want to avoid that kind of an outcome. But that said, thank you for your answer. I do feel like your intervention is allowing us to understand market structures and the post law school education of students far better than we have until now. So I look forward to whatever you have to do with Daksha, and you assembled a great team. So it's going to look very nice, I'm sure. Aparna, do you want to say something about the kinds of students who come and the kinds of students you hope would go out?
Right. So of course, I'm at a National Law University. Students come in. This is the high school to law school model. You come in straight from high school. You get an integrated at our university a BA LLB degree, and you go out at the age of 22, 23 after 5 years here. The vision behind this which we realize very unevenly, I think, across law schools, is that you have a liberal arts centered legal education. And so the integration between the BA program and the LLB program. In terms of who our students are, let me say institutionally, I think we operate on an assumption, very, upper caste, urban, privileged, upper crust. So I don't want to say middle class, because what we call middle class is really probably the top 1 to 2% of society. So very much economically the top layer of the economy, people, right? And our programs are geared towards them. So the kind of programming that we have, the kind of support structures that we have, the kind of English language skills, for example, that we assume both in our entrance exam and just as a skill set that we don't even have to pay attention to. I mean, consciously pay attention to. We don't provide support structures for students who don't necessarily fit that paradigm. And that's a failing. That's a failing because we are, at the end of the day, public institutions. The imagination definitely is that this is available, that this is open and should be open to everyone who, even if we are not right now, we should. That's always an aspiration for the future. So if that's the case, I think there is a disconnect between our institutional imagination of who our ideal student is, and the reality of the society around us. Having said that, when people come to my course, and I mostly teach in the third year, I teach constitutional law in the third year, and then I teach specialized seminars in the final year, and of course postgraduate programs, but we won't go there right now. My students in the third year are often come into the third year fairly certain about what they want to do with life, which is that they mostly want to go into corporate law, and they're fairly certain about it, or they mostly have their ideas clear. It's in fourth year that doubt sets in. This is when they have to actually start making choices, and you see people coming back in the fourth year and asking you, these are the choices that are in front of me. I don't know what to do. Can you help me out? So the confusion seems to set in the fourth year. What I do with my class is I go with an assumption that many of my students will be going out to practice corporate law in law firm settings, and my challenge for myself is, if I can deliver my course in a way that they see the relevance of constitutional law and constitutional principles in the work that they do on a day-to-day basis in the law firms that they're sitting in, I think I would have achieved some part of my purpose in the classroom. How do you do that? You think of constitutional law as applied political theory, as being relevant then to any kind of engagement that you have with law in a variety of settings. So so the kind of examples that you bring to class, the kind of prompts and questions and scenarios and hypotheticals and whatever you throw out, the kind of material that you bring in. The idea is to think of, again, for me, constitutional law, I'm sure the subject matters would differ, but to think of this as being relevant to whatever you're doing, regardless of, it's not just if you're the constitutional law litigator or an academic or, working in public policy, but in whatever way in which you're leading your life in the law, outside of, well, not outside of the law, but outside of the legal profession, that you see the relevance of some of the enduring debates, concerns, principles that we are talking about. So that's where I want to leave them. That's my aspiration for my course. I don't know to what extent I realize it. That's the aspiration for the course, to leave them there at the end of my course. And I should say, I get very happy when people come back in the fourth year and say that they're confused because they were very certain that they wanted to go down a path of corporate law, and then they come back and they say, but there's so much, the things that excite me the most are possibly not in that space. And I know as a teacher, I should be agnostic to some of these questions of, you know, where my students land up. But I should say that gives me a lot of perverse joy.
This
Yeah.
is, no, you know, I love the mischief of that answer. Because, you know, harkening back actually very seriously to what Nigam was speaking about earlier, this focus on the student. What I really liked about your answer, Aparna, is you're talking about nourishing what the student already wants to do. You're not here to change anyone's mind, you know. Like if they happen to change it, you can grin at yourself and be privately happy, but you're not going out there and rubbing the aspiration for leading a certain life well. And when I think about my best teachers, and I like also think of another tax professor, we had Shreya Rao teaching us tax, and she was amazing. And like through her, we learned a love for comics, we learned a love for beauty, we learned a love for curiosity, you know, of something which seems so dry, but is like heavily based on a principled understanding of the world. And also to harken back to what Papan was saying earlier, for me, actually, law school wasn't about learning the law at all. You know, what I learned from law school was systems thinking, to understand how cohesive systems of rules and human interactions can be structured through a language of authority, right? It so happens that that language was a law, but it could have very well have been Greek or Tamil, you know, or folk art. And really, I think the pedagogic aspiration that it works for any generalist is really the great aspect about being a lawyer, because you can study law and do anything you want subsequently. So I see the value of both the points that you're trying to make, Aparna. So thank you for that. Chauhan, what do you have to say about your student, who they are, who you would like them to be?
Yeah, so actually I'll break up my answer into 3 different clusters, because I've had the chance to interact with undergraduate students, postgraduate students, and also a serious investment now in distance and extension programs, because the universities need the revenue. And as I said, obviously with the economic situation right now, perhaps there'll be more pressure on more of us, even in public universities, to contribute to the revenue enhancing part of the universities, right? So possibly we'll be spending more time in distance and executive and online programs in the near future. But coming back to your question, so my answer on undergraduate students partially overlaps with Aparna, but there are also some differences. So I'll focus just on the differences. So clearly, the profile of students which was entering these so-called elite institutions 15 years ago has changed, right? So for instance, I can tell you that in my own immediate peer group, there was a much heavier concentration of students from the well-known private schools in Delhi, Bombay, or Bangalore. Of course, I came from an elite private school in my own hometown. And most of us were intuitively quite familiar with English by Indian standards. Right. So we didn't really struggle in terms of communication or articulation. And as Aparna said, even as teachers, they could safely assume that we'll be able to take to the text, engage in activities on our own, and have our own life outside of the classroom. Increasingly, I think that assumption does not hold true. The simple reason behind that is that the profile of applicants for the undergraduate program has considerably expanded. It's expanded not just into tier 2 towns, Lucknow, Bhopal, or Jaipur, which have now become hubs of coaching for CLAT or IELTS, but there's also a difference in the class profile. So remember, with economic liberalization, a lot of people who have historically lived in poverty have managed to get public sector jobs or private sector employment. And their children are now also very eager to learn. They have a hunger to enter into these selective institutions. So the kind of intake that you're getting in 2019 or 2018 is very different from the kind of intake which schools like NLS or NALSAR got in 2003 or 4. So I think that distinction is very clear, right? And clearly, because the legal education market in India has increased exponentially over the last 10 years, you've had nearly a doubling of the number of law colleges being run. There's a greater awareness also in terms of pursuing law as a career option or as a study option for many families which would have otherwise not considered it. So I'm not saying that we've been able to reach out to the most disadvantaged or the weakest sections of society. We haven't done that at all. But certainly in terms of the demographics, you definitely have more students from OBC backgrounds entering these institutions as opposed to 10 or 12 years ago. You definitely have more students who have serious problems with English language articulation entering these institutions. So even as people who are only, let's say in my case or Aparna's case, we are only about 15 years older than our students, even that feels like a generation gap now. And more than a generation gap, it's also a class gap. A class gap not in terms of wealth possession, but the basic marker of difference being familiarity with English. And I can tell you that in NALSAR, there has been a very raging debate and considerable student discord over whether or not the school is doing enough to support students with English language skills in the early years of their study, right? Many students, in fact, say that they feel completely left alone. Their peers don't interact with them. Teachers don't dignify them with coherent responses. And then, of course, that's a larger reality of universities in India. So I just wanted to add that because that's a point which a lot of people who are looking at these elite institutions tend to miss. The second thing I'll say, just to differentiate my answer from Aparna, is that yes, at the moment, most students who are graduating are beginning their careers in commercial law firms, and a sprinkling of them will, of course, join litigation chambers. Some will study further. That's the standard sort of profile of 4 or 5 of these institutions. But increasingly, I think that is changing. And clearly, in the next year or two, there's going to be a serious contraction of the economy. So there are already students reaching out to me from the current 4th and 5th year who are already planning to focus more on the public sector jobs. So whether it is preparation for civil services or judicial services. So that might be a passing phase. It depends on when the legal services market becomes ripe again. But I think it's also a structural shift which is happening because students these days are far more aware of the decisions they're making, right? They're investigating their options a lot more. They're talking to older cohorts. They're talking to alumni. So I think we should not underestimate the judgmental capacity of students. They're investigating and closely researching their options and perhaps doing it far more intensively than what people would have done in the 90s and 2000s, right? Now, coming to my own immediate sort of observations, clearly with the postgraduate program, the layers of difficulties are very different. Historically, it's not been as competitive in the NLU context as the undergraduate program. So invariably, you have a large profile of students who have not been accustomed to the process of writing term papers or writing analytical answers in response to questions. So many of them, in fact, struggle with the one-year LLM. So we had shifted to the one-year LLM 7 years ago on the premise that as opposed to losing 2 years of professional income, maybe more people will join the LLM programs if they only lose 1 year of professional income. But the experiment has had a mixed result. For some students who have come through the 5-year system or have had prior exposure to the English language and research skills, the LLM is a natural extension of what they would have studied in the undergraduate program. But for a large number of students who have only done annual exams or semester exams in their 3-year LLB or their 5-year LLB, the LLM is a huge struggle. And as a teacher, I think since my experience is limited to these 2 elite institutions, I find that the teaching the LLM class is a far more intensive and rigorous experience for the teacher because you have to be attentive to the internal differences in the classroom in a far more meaningful fashion as compared to, let's say, a year 3 or a year 4 cohort where students have already internalized certain norms of reading and comprehension. So I think that's a difference which I think everybody would have observed. So I think we need a serious discussion on what can be done practically to try and not only reframe these LLM programs in a more meaningful way, but also to reach out to a demographic who sees the utility of the LLM program in the right sense. For instance, every year we have students joining the LLM program in the hope that it helps them in the legal services market. And we tend to disappoint them right in the first week by telling them that the LLM program that we are offering is not really geared towards a career in a commercial law firm, right? So many students, in fact, don't join our program for that very reason. So I think we have to pay a bit more attention to what's happening in the postgraduate space in the NLUs. Of course, in the larger universities, you have a reverse pyramid. You have a much larger intake in the undergraduate program and only a much smaller number of students who are perhaps interested in transitioning to a PhD or careers in teaching tend to join the LLM. So actually, if you speak to your counterparts in Delhi University or Madras University or Bombay University, you'll find that the more serious students are joining the LLM, whereas in the national law schools, we've kind of inverted the process, which is a huge continuing problem. The third thing I'll say is about distance and extension education, because clearly we are enmeshed in a certain economy where these programs will be needed for our survival. Some schools like the ones in Bangalore or Delhi, of course, have a locational advantage. They can interact more with governmental agencies and have more visibility. In that sense, NALSAR also has a certain reputational advantage. And to some extent, it's a reality. Some people may say we are trying to monetize our reputation. But for a lot of people who enroll for our distance diplomas or who enroll for these periodic training programs, they also see as a value addition for themselves. And coming to my own limited experience, I've done some basic sessions on interpretation and on legal drafting for different kinds of groups, right? At one point, because we were short of personnel, I even got involved in a program for insurance regulators. I don't know, I had no expertise in that area, but they were not really looking for knowledge of insurance law. Or in another group, ended up speaking to a group of advocates from Telangana who were seriously struggling with English. I didn't understand Telugu. So we had to find a practical way of communicating inside the classroom. So these experiences are also available, and I think it's an important space that the relatively better known colleges, public or private, have to take seriously, not just from the revenue enhancement perspective, but also in terms of their public visibility. For instance, some of my colleagues have launched newer diplomas in ADR or financial services in the last couple of years, and they've got a very good turnout. It's not just students who have done their graduation from other colleges who are joining, but working professionals are also coming in, spending several days on campus and finding some value for their money. Lastly, I'll just mention a small project which I'm participating in at the moment, which is actually a new experience for me. And the reason I'm doing it is because at the moment, it looks like we'll have to transact most of our coming semester online. So I thought I'll get used to that process of delivering online classes, since I didn't do it in March and April because of being on research leave. So it's actually a former LLM student of NLS called Nachiketa, who's running a private project called Virtual Law School. And I'm running one of the courses there, where at the moment there are about 60 or 70 students who are signed up for my course. I think the aggregate number is about 500. And in the first 2 months, it is being run as a pro bono program. And I'm finding that students who are participating in this program are invariably from locations which don't appear in our mainstream conversations. So there are students from University of Calcutta, students from Rohtak, students from Warangal, students from Mysore, who will invariably not even end up applying for the CLAT in their respective stages of study. And this profile of students, thanks to the online mechanisms, now actually is very eager to learn from people who they think can teach them. So of course, I'm of course speaking from a privileged place as a teacher in an institution which has some reputational capital. I may not actually deserve that. But there are students who are very eager to learn, and I'm finding that despite the difficulties of the online interface, the level of engagement and the questions I'm getting from them are actually far more intensive than what I would normally get in my third or fourth year classes. So perhaps the future is not going to be as despondent as some people are predicting. Maybe there are these other possibilities which are available to us as institutions to think about who our student is going to be.
Chauhan, we're always happy to just let you keep speaking. It's always nice to hear you speak, because in the guise of 1 point you make about 20,000. I'm going to try to respond to at least summarize what you said maybe in a few sentences. I hope I cover all the areas. So if I miss something out, just let me know. But essentially, on the undergraduate side, I skipped what Aparna had said about access. So thanks for bringing that up again. You're completely right. And we see this in the data as well. There's no question that the range of people who are coming into law school is far wider than it used to be. And now the new marker is whether you can speak English or not. Yeah. That determines your place in the social hierarchy as well. So this is doing a lot of things to the social fabric within law schools in the country. And it's actually very visibly unresolved. Right, because we're seeing it in places that you really hope you don't, such as the number of sexual crimes that happen on campus, for instance. And this is very strange because this is not something that we thought about earlier. But the fact that we have richer, more diverse classrooms is the most important aspiration of teaching law, I feel, because lawyers more than anyone else makes it seem like the law is only their business. But clearly what all of us are talking about is that it's everyone's business, and everyone needs to have a certain understanding and orientation towards the law. So that aspiration is pretty clear here. There's no question about it. The second point about that you were making about the legal services market, and I suppose this is where Papan is also relevant, is that I actually think we need to see more and more lawyers and law students trying to create equity, as opposed to working in service. And that means, because a large part of the legal services market is actually undiscovered. The only ones who have access to legal services are people who have money to afford that, right? Like when we had a small accident a few years ago, and there's a small issue of the RC book not being transferred or something like that, we were thinking twice about the fees that we, very, very nominal fees that we wanted to pay to the law firm that was supporting us in this exercise. So there's if it's a problem for someone like me from, clearly an extremely privileged context, I can't imagine what it's like for most people. It's almost like we wish people don't go to the legal services industry almost, right? So if you say you need a lawyer, it's not a pleasant thing. Nobody says, hey, we need a lawyer now. So there's clearly something about something to be said about lawyers really reimagining the way in which services can be created. And honestly, if you ask me, I think now is the best time to be an entrepreneur. Your needs are most obvious. Like customers will behave most honestly. So there's a certain possibility of people having to create jobs because there's nothing else to do. It's a matter of survival, right? Thriving is a matter of survival at this point in time. And I think that's a good consequence. Your point on the 1-year LLM is actually counterintuitive and quite surprising. I didn't actually think that it would be a problem. In fact, I would actually think that in a place like India where so many people choose to go, not so many people, but a large number of people who work in Indian academia seem to come here with like foreign LLMs. It's a 9-month program, not even 1-year program. So you'd imagine that the urgency towards moving on with your life and further development should exist, but clearly it doesn't for some odd reason. And this last thing about DD, right? So that I would actually disagree with you, because I think we should separate the revenue aspirations of a university from what the DED is supposed to do. Like the second point you made was that it has a public obligation and you want to reach more students. And I completely agree with that. But there are many ways to ensure the survival and thriving of law universities in the country. And to think of DED just as a vehicle for that is misrepresentative of the strategy that you need around it. You can't imagine that the DED is going to solve all your problems. There might be many other configurations. And I can think of the research center that Aparna directs at NLU as being one kind of model. It can be government projects, contracted projects, the work that places like where Papan worked at the Center for Policy Research. I don't see why that shouldn't necessarily happen within a public university. The point I'm trying to make is not so much about a particular course of action, as much as to say there needs to be a staggered way of thinking about revenue within law colleges. And really, at least at a place that we all come from, we know that there's enough alumni wealth to sustain the university independent of, like, say, state support, even though that's not necessarily desirable, right? Yeah, no, certainly, you can certainly say more about that.
I'll push back on the distance education project ideas, because don't limit your analysis to the very well-known schools,
right?
Be it NLS or Jindal or NLU Delhi or NALSAR, right? We'll probably survive. We'll probably survive the recession.
Yeah.
But think about it as a larger universe of institutions.
I completely agree.
To balance their budgets, trying to devote resources to hiring staff, spending money on infrastructure. So what I was trying to say is not that the sole purpose of distance education is revenue enhancement.
Right.
I was saying that increasingly, because of the current situation, there'll definitely be a stronger emphasis in that direction. Yeah. But if you just look at the books of any of these schools, you will see that distance programs, extension programs like training programs are actually generating a lot more revenue than independently funded research projects. Independently funded research projects cannot sustain institutions. So anyway, we can disagree on facts there, but we should think about it from an aggregate point of view, that even if there is a problem of economic necessity which pushes us in that direction, how can we use this space more creatively? Right? I think that's what I was trying to say.
This one second, Papan. Just to clarify, Sidharth, then we don't disagree at all. We're actually on the same page. All that I'm trying to say is DED is one of the strategies to increase revenue. And you're absolutely right. For a smaller law university, especially even of the sort that Papan has invented, with the kind of savvy and the design language, the class of which is not reflected in his background, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't as green as it is, because this is such a nice...
I'll ask my team to change it.
Yeah, like this, that white, blue and gray is great, Papan. There's no need to add this like strange fluorescent dimension to this. But the point I agree with you, Sidharth, is that the revenue pressures are one. DED is a great leveler, because if you provide great service, because you have the advantage of online distribution, you can actually provide the service far better than anyone. All that I'm saying is you need a systematic approach to this revenue question. DED is one of the strategies. That's I suppose that's where the intervention comes from. Papan, I will just come to you in a moment. Nigam also has a take on all of this. Do you want to, you can just make your comment, Nigam. You can start right after.
I come from a university that's only, and from a law school that's only 1 year old. So I'll make my comments brief. Actually, I just want to say one thing only, which is that I don't know if this is only applicable to private law schools or private universities. I think it might be applicable across the board, which is that we got to prevent, we have an ideal student. My ideal student is somebody who doesn't take a transactional view of the law or of education in general. So, he doesn't believe, he or she doesn't believe that education is a machine into which you put 1 rupee and then it comes out as 10 rupees at the end of 5 years. And I think this might be applicable. I mean, certainly it's a problem with private universities, but I think it's an issue with public universities as well. And I think that transactional view of education is creating a problem, right? So, I want my student, my ideal student is of course an undergrad, like other universities here. We are also offering a BLLB and a BBA LLB course. So it's an undergrad. So an undergrad who's not really sure about his or her objectives. 17-year-olds are not sure of what they're going to do 1 month later, much less 5 years later. I mean, they think they might be sure, but their ideas change quite a lot. So it's not always clear. But what I want the student to be doing is the student has to be curious about life, right? About finding out new things, getting excited about new domains of knowledge or skills that they may not even have heard of, right? That curiosity, that excitement at discovering things, the excitement that a lot of us went through in law school, where forget about what we had to do, whether we needed an internship in merchant or not. What we were excited about was we discovered principles of law or principles of argumentation or principles of political theory or just principles of living, right? Which we did not know when we went into law school. And that excitement, that passion is what we went to school for. That doesn't have to, I mean, there may be a class angle to it in the sense that, you might be worried about money, but that's, I think that might be limiting this discussion. I think that even whatever class economic class a person comes from, that attitude of passion in life, trying to figure out new things and new ways of doing things, I think that is the kind of student that would be ideal for us. And what we are getting, unfortunately, in many cases, are students with a very transactional view of life, right? Saying, okay, this is what we call ROI, return on investment, right? So, what do I get out of the money I spent? And I think that is a very wrong attitude towards the law. That's all I have for you, Badri.
Why do you say these things like so casually? You would say the most insightful things and then say it like, you might be passing a remark about a boring defensive block by Rahul Dravid, which is actually a work of beauty, right? This intervention of yours, Nigam, reminds me of one of my favorite books of all time, The Pleasure of Finding Things Out by Richard Feynman, which is a collection of his speeches, short works, and other things. It had a lot of beautiful lectures. One was on his public engagement after the Challenger disaster.
That's the one I was thinking about, actually. Yeah.
There's another really beautiful one on cargo cult science, what it means to be scientific and what's not. There's another one called There's More Room at the Bottom, I think, which was basically an introduction to nanotechnology before the field even existed. And Feynman was just so playful. He loved doing things. He was wrong a lot. It didn't really bother him that he was wrong. And what I took from you, Nigam, is actually, I've always wanted to invent a religion which was inspired by curiosity, wonder, and acceptance, or the joy of asking questions, or the capacity to marvel at things and to accept things which are different from what you know or you've encountered in your life. So in a certain way, it all begins with the capacity to ask questions. And I think that's what you've always taught us. So it's great to see you reiterating that point right now. Papan, you want to say something? Sorry, I just wanted to not distract the core of the...
Yeah, no, in fact, it connects what Nigam mentioned now, because and the point that Sidharth and both Sidharth and Aparna are sort of contending with. To attract this kind of student, right, at some level, we have to think about the revenue model a little differently, right? And that's going to be a big challenge. So what you were mentioning, Badri, right? Can endowments be one way to sort of have a different, approach to the running of a university, a public university in particular? The IITs are very successful in that regard, right? So what in legal education is the missing gap that is stopping us from getting there? Is it that alumni are there and they are putting in their weight on certain occasions, but there is no concerted strategy to build an endowment. I mean, I'd really like to hear from both Sidharth and Aparna, because I think a lot of the answers to the kind of student that Nigam is talking about will finally go to this endowment, right? Like how Princeton was built, or how many other free thinking spaces were built. I'd really like to know. I mean, I don't know the answer.
So, hey, but Papan, there's actually one whole dimension here which we don't talk about enough. You know, the NLUs, we are called national law universities. Two words out of those three, perhaps all three, are questionable. There's no reason to believe we are national. There's no reason to believe we are a university. And whether we really teach law is always under question. It's because the legislative structure of each of these universities are fundamentally different. The funding structures and support structures are fundamentally different. Most of the national law universities at least are subjects to the state legislature without no unifying framework, right? If you start looking at state law universities and their own thing, there's no common standards besides a very broad BCI regulation on what a legal education should look like.
Right.
So, in a certain way, you're almost insulated from it in a good sense, because you don't have the obligations to hand someone over a degree. So you have the capacity to play around with what the content of the education itself is going to look like. And in a certain way, the fact that you only have your brand name is liberating. You don't have, you're not biased by anything else. But the big problem here, which I just want to flag off, we won't get into that because that's a whole regulatory black hole. And I'm speaking because last few months of working with the consortium of NLUs has brought this aspect of it to light, which I didn't really know about. Like funding is questionable, domicile policies are questionable. Questionable in the sense that they invite further conversation. Access is a big problem, so on and so forth. So that definitely is not a problem with the IITs, for instance. But the second point you made about better, more robust structures for the alumni, yeah, completely agree. There's no question about it. These guys have the advantage of age, but I'm not sure necessarily that other universities have it. And perhaps when they have it, I don't know. Even if you take DU and stuff, right? Like LawFac doesn't have this. You don't have the peer group culture necessarily. The peers that you cultivate seem to come out of your professional life outside of a national law school kind of context, and perhaps it happens in other 3-year and 5-year programs. I don't know enough about it to say more about it, but we'll leave it here for now if that's okay, because we have time for one last question to all of you. And Papan,
Aparna has had her hand up.
Oh, is it? I'm so sorry. I can't see. Sorry, Aparna. Go on.
No, I just want to make two very quick points. One, to say that, in case there is any doubt with the wider audience, we are only talking about very distinct kind of institutions here. Even when we're talking about public institutions, NLUs are by no means representative in terms of volume of the kind of the public legal education landscape. And so much of what Sidharth and I at least are saying is not translatable to the bulk of legal education that's happening in the country. The second thing I think we should acknowledge, that the diversity question, but also some of the very much needed churning that's happening in the student bodies at NLUs at least, is coming not just from English language deficiency or a class, widening of class or regional location, but also caste, and caste is front and center. And unless we acknowledge those dynamics, the caste assertion, the very much needed caste assertion that's happening on campuses, and therefore both the mobilization that's happening, the alienation around caste that's finally being acknowledged, even if it's not being acknowledged enough, I think it's very central to both students' self-understanding of who they are and the institution's understanding of how it should deliver its programs and its support structures, etc. So I think we might be doing ourselves a disservice in this conversation if we don't call it caste front and center and sort of use what might appear to be euphemisms. So I just wanted to.
Oh, that's Aparna, thanks for this. If there is 6 words to capture what this is all about, it is not going to be lawyers, artists, and others. It's going to be access, empathy. So I guess it keeps coming back to this, and I want to say, gender, sexuality, caste, class. Law schools need to be as colorful as they can be. They need to be as rich and as diverse as real life is. And they just simply are very monotone right now. And yeah, this black and white way of living is very sad. Like, yeah, we do better with having more diversity, and it's just better conversations, so on and so forth. So, okay, one more question. I'm very sorry, we have like 3 minutes, but I'll leave it to you to answer as effusively or as synoptically as you would like. You will be responsible for delaying each other's dinner, not me. That's what I'm trying to imply. So the question that I have for all of you is, what is your message to educators? Because what the endearing theme for me, endearing and enduring, is that all of you are speaking as like educators first. You're all speaking as teachers first. And I'm finding this refreshing. There's nothing really that we spoke about in terms of what kind of structures can facilitate what you do. It's been more about what you're noticing in your interactions in public education, civic education, the one-to-one conversation, so on and so forth. It's really wonderful. And I think, so therefore, I would love to hear what you have to say as a message to other educators besides love your students. I mean, that seems fairly obvious. I would recommend a particular lens to look at it, or if you want to help answer this question. What is one thing you've learned in your line of work, which you think everyone should know? Right? So maybe you don't have to necessarily answer that as a matter of speaking to educators, but what's one thing you've learned that you think everyone should know? I'll leave you to answer either of the ones that you want. Papan, we'll obviously start with you.
The one thing I have learned is the regulations are crazy in India. And,
Papan, it has to be a useful fact. It can't be an opinion that what will I do with the fact that regulations are crazy?
so
Even
you have to be innovative I mean, you can innovate in multiple ways, I'm sure. The one thing I've learned is learn to innovate, in the digital medium, and learn to innovate in a way where regulations are not really troubling you too much if you can, but at some point, all of us will get regulated. That's the one thing I learned.
I know. I mean, it's happening to Facebook as well, right? It's a matter of like doing it to yourself before someone else does it to you. So, yeah, I mean, I mean, it's a very serious point. I'm sorry to be giggling at it, but I will say that you set us off. It's not my fault. So, Chauhan, what would you have to say as one thing you've learned in your line of work that you think everyone should?
I think the most significant quality that a teacher needs to consciously develop, it's not natural, is a love for learning. Because the love for learning is not something that's born in us. It has to be cultivated. Some of us are lucky to get external conditioning, which helps us in that direction. But if you want to see yourself as a teacher over a 30, 40-year career, at least in public universities, there is a big revolving door. I think you need to have a constant love for learning, and that's something I would try and communicate to others who are thinking of becoming teachers as well.
Man, that's such a beautiful answer. Yeah, I like Chauhan, I have learned love for learning from you. I mean, even if you talk about like something inane, you end up speaking of it only philosophically and systematically. And I really admire that because, it often feels like our education is irrelevant, and the way you sort of bring it back to both the ideal and the real simultaneously is why I personally admire you.
And can I just add one more sentence? If some of the viewers are thinking about taking up teaching careers, even if you are an average student, you can be an excellent teacher. So it doesn't mean that the best students will make the best teachers. It's a different career path. It has its own learning curve. And like any other profession, you learn on the job.
Yeah, but hey, there's another way of also saying that, which is functionally, I think, like to be a good student, you need to be a good teacher. To be a good teacher, you need to be a good student. And when you say average in terms of marks, I was at least the two of us were very average. I don't know about others here. Aparna has 500,000 gold medals. Nigam, of course.
My shameful past, follies of my youth.
Follies of your youth is all the gold you've accumulated over the years. Nigam and Papan are like lurking around, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. But like thinking about these things exist in binaries, right? If you want to be a good, like say, instrumentalist, you need to be able to listen to music better. So if you want to play music better, you need to hear music better. Be a good student, be a good teacher. So you can always approach this from the other angle, which is the nice part. As a learning hack, you can always swap your position and sort of approach what you're doing again if you want to learn anything from first principles. So that's a nice, important intervention, useful one sentence. Aparna, what is your message / one thing you've learned?
Well, so two things. One is imposter syndrome in academia is real. You see so many students who want to go into academics, but they're doing fantastic things already, and they just think they're not good enough. So and I think that comes from both some kind of an innate, but also an acquired love for learning. The more you learn, the more you know how much you don't know, and that feeds into an imposter syndrome. So to know that so many of the doubts in your head are part of that, I think was an important, I think, moment for me at a time when I thought I was floundering with, just knowing there was so much that I didn't know. So that was one thing. The other thing I would say is that this has been a learning for me from when I started off, fairly straight out of my postgraduate program, and maybe after a couple of years into the teaching of law. And I think I saw students only through the prism of my relationship with them, that I was teaching them a course, and that there was a very unidimensional sort of my understanding of my students was as if they are my students, but they obviously, students have full, rich, complex lives, and so I think I've learned to let go, and to not be very, very uptight and rule bound, and be more empathetic in that sense of letting students be, letting them figure out things at their own pace. Of course, I mean, there have to be some bounds of academic discipline and what have you, but I think that's been an important learning for me, that I shouldn't define students just through the prism of my relationship with them, and think of them as sort of fully embodied beings. Yeah.
Oh man, that is such a nice point, Aparna. You always, like, to me, it's like you made it a point about your education through the students, as opposed to, like, to make your life richer with the lives of those around you. And on the first point, like, I really admire the fact that you keep asking this question about access, because I think how much ever you ask it, it's not going to be enough. I mean, I just said this, and I will say the same sentence even again. So thanks for saying that. And yeah, life is better with all of these things. And Nigam, as always, you have the last word. And yeah, so look forward to hear what you have to say about a message for your educators, or other educators, administrators. What are the things you've learned which you think everyone should know?
I think for me, I think educators, therefore, I think the most important thing for them is to see if they can expand the student's imagination. If they're able to do that, I think that's the point of education well served. I think a student should be able to get into a place and then leave that place with his imaginative powers expanded. And I think that's what education should be for in any domain. So that's my final thought on it.
Thanks, Nigam. That is awesome, because I mean, like, love for curiosity. You ignite someone's mind, someone's passion. Anything is possible. If you tell them this is what you need to know, you're actually limiting the kind of outcomes you can have. So it's always nicer to be surprised by the outcome, and really, like, not add a determinacy to what happens after your education, but really wonder what could happen through your education. So that's it's a nice shift from the machinistic view of the world. So we shall close here now, and usually we ask with a question. We end with a question on what it means for you to contemplate giving in through your work and also through your life, not necessarily just through your work. If you want to say a sentence about it, feel free to, because we keep coming back to this, because these exercises are meant to be encouraging acts of giving, regular giving, not irregular, occasional giving. So if you have a message for our viewers on how you think about giving in your life and how they should think about it in their own, again, a sentence each, and then we'll all say good night. Yeah, Papan?
Yeah, no, I think giving is, for me at least, a process of also, giving to oneself. Like the more you give to a cause or any form of giving, I think you are giving a certain, dimension to your personality through that act of giving. It makes you someone a little different from who you were just before you gave. I don't know if that's clear enough. But yeah.
How can you say that? It was very clear. It was awesome. There's a nice way of saying it, because living for another person is living for yourself, and there's a civic aspiration to that, and the sense of oneness. So yeah, it was a great point. I think you should say it fearlessly. reason to say it any other way. Aparna, what about you? What do you have to say?
I should say I'm uncomfortable with the language of giving or charity, because that centers the giver and makes it as if, and creates a power equation between the person who's giving and person who's receiving. I will defer to Nigam on this, but for example, tax is a different way of thinking about what you owe to society at large. Charity is a very different model of thinking of the interaction between the individual and society. And I would think that there has to be some vocabulary between tax and charity, which captures the sense of public giving back, public paying back, public dues that one has, a social due that one has, that one is performing. Maybe service captures it. I'm not really sure, but I would think that it's located somewhere on the spectrum between tax and charity, and or / giving. And yeah, that's the way I would approach it as well, as a social, as an obligation, as a member of the society, as a part of one's political obligations, as a part of one's social obligations, rather than as an act of charity.
That's right. I think we can just, that's a good question from the perspective of tax and incentive and all of that. But we can just shift this sort of gap in how we think about like charity tax giving by taking the giver out of it. I think like all giving should be anonymous or anonymized in some way, because the celebration of the giver is not the aspiration, except for private enjoyment, and except as a matter of pride that you want to share with like near and dear ones to inspire others to give. But unfortunately, that's taken precedence over the regular act of giving, because the regular act of giving is not one to celebrate. It's a one that should be normal. And I got the feeling that that's what you're sort of...
So can I just say, I mean, it's anonymization doesn't really take away from the concern that I have, which is to think of it as something that you are doing. I mean, even if it's for you as the person, you know that you are doing this act of charity that centers you, and we see this, the part to help paved with good intentions kind of interventions in quote unquote social causes, which might create more harm, because you're centered on what this act of giving does for you, rather than what it means for the person who's at the other end of that engagement. So which is why I would still say that anonymization, for example, doesn't get there, but yeah, the larger point.
That's I fully agree with you. So I think the spectrum is clear. The act of giving, yeah, I mean, we don't, it's just now we're splitting hairs because we're lawyers and we can be, but I agree with where you're coming from. Chauhan, second last word.
No, I mean, it's a difficult time to answer that question, because we are in a situation where there has been immense human suffering in our own society. And, even giving away months of your salary is only a small drop in the ocean. So, I mean, I agree with Aparna, we should not be using a word like charity, which is why I think the emphasis on ideas of solidarity come first. But if you situate your own position, if you have a comfortable salary, if you have a surplus in your bank account, and you're part of a system where there are literally millions of people who don't have the means to sustain themselves beyond a few days, then, I mean, beyond a point, you can try what you can try and chip away, but you have to be, to some extent, be detached from the results also.
But we have no option but to like hope and sort of like love and live fearlessly as much as we can. So, the point is well taken. I like this language of solidarity. Yeah, anonymization, you're right, Aparna, doesn't capture it. Solidarity, fraternity. I mean, I've said this before somewhere here, but like Ambedkar used to say that equality and liberty are made possible because of fraternity, right? Doesn't mean anything without fraternity, obviously. So you have to fraternize, and fraternizing happens with your hearts, with your wallets, with your minds, and many other ways, and tax apparently. But Nigam, of course, is not just the last word on tax in this conversation, but in most conversations that happen in our country, apparently the world. So, Nigam, last word for all of us.
Yeah, I was going to say tax, of course, represents one part of the equation of how the government should support programs that sustain people who are not able to sustain themselves. And that's one part of the equation. And the other part is what is, called in various quarters as charity and giving, etc. But I would like to say that I would take this opportunity, in fact, to say that what it should also be focusing on is daily acts of kindness and courtesy. I think that's very important towards people who are in a vulnerable position, who are not able to support themselves, and who are related to us in various ways. They're either working for us or they're supplying us with things. And it's important that we treat them like we treat every other human being. We treat them with dignity, respect that they deserve, and as I said, everyday acts of kindness. I think that in the current scenario, in addition to doing all the other things that are being done, that's very important that we develop that attitude.
Nigam, that's a great response, and I think that just resolved it for me personally, because I was uncomfortable with the view that charity focused too much on you, because I was feeling like, yeah, man, I have an obligation to maintain solidarity, so it should also focus on me because there's a responsibility on me. But Nigam, what you just did to turn that from charity to kindness is much nicer, because kindness is a virtue. We all can be kind. We must be kind. Don't want to avoid tax because we shouldn't avoid tax, perhaps. So thanks for framing it as an act of kindness. And the greatest pleasure for me is that tonight's session has been such an act of kindness with all of you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, your time, the expanded version of it with us. We hope you had a good time more than anything else. We hope you'll be back with us. And we hope you'll tell all your followers to like, subscribe, share. Because now we're starting to speak the language of YouTube. So please help us do the needful, because we are just not going to do it. Maybe we will eventually, but in the meantime, we might. To our viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. Good night. Good luck.
Thank you, Badri. Thanks, everyone.